Welcome to the Prodigal and the Priest podcast, a podcast about faith, sports, and two friends from different cultures. Here are your hosts, Joey Scansella and Father Paul Bechter.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you're listening to our podcast. We welcome you to Prodigal and the Priest. Father Paul, how are you doing?
Doing good. That was a very inclusive intro. Trying to catch anyone at any time.
Any and all. I am all things to all people.
That's beautiful.
Said John Paul II or some other saint.
Right. Or St. Paul said to be all things for all people.
Yeah, sure, okay. Whatever. So, how was your Labor Day weekend?
It was good, man.
Do anything fun? Hung
out with some friends. Got involved in a fantasy football draft.
Wonder who roped you into that.
Yeah. I don't know.
Probably a really good friend.
Yeah, probably.
That was me.
Yeah, it was Joey.
That was fun, though.
Yeah, and you might have created a monster because I find it really interesting. And
yeah,
I'm probably going to neglect all my duties to just...
you just don't show up to Sunday Mass anymore. You're like, sorry, can't say the noon. Game time.
It's game time. I've got stat sheets everywhere. I'm making notes for next year's draft.
All of a sudden, you've thrown out of the office any biblical text, and you just have binders of fantasy football, PPR, stats, reception, perception, different things like that. It'll be awesome. Yeah,
it was fun.
It is fun.
So yeah, it was a good weekend. How's your weekend?
Good. Besides the fact that in that draft, I lobbied to get you into it to make a 14-team league. And then you got a primary, a primo,
pretty good spot,
draft spot, and I got this end of the draft terrible. So we'll see how it goes.
That'll just make your comeback victory all the more glorious.
That's right. Well, being a pessimistic person, I've already put my record at 0-14. So I will not win it all. Nowhere. So anyway, let's get into our topic today. I thought it was very interesting. This past weekend, Father, we saw the gospel from Matthew 18, 15 through 20, and it says this: if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have won over your brother. If he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, so that every fact may be established on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell the church. If he refuses to listen even to the church, treat him as you would a Gentile or a tax collector. I'm going to kind of stop there, but I think it's an interesting and challenging gospel, and it's a time that we get a lot of questions. I get it a lot as a youth minister. I'm sure you get it a lot as a priest, is to say, really, how do we call somebody out? In the moment of somebody is either, whether it's struggling with a personal sin, whether it's a public sin, or just doing something that maybe isn't 100% sinful, but just not good for them, life
only
choices.
85% sinful.
Yeah. Over under 50%. So, what percentage needs to be to make it a sin that you have to confess? Probably 51%.
I think that's the wrong question.
Okay, so I'll put that in the questions, and we can follow up on that on our
we'll make an algorithm.
Episode. Yeah, but really, that idea that our society, I feel, does not like to call people out, and gets very uncomfortable with it. We usually make excuses and say, "Well, that's not my job. That's for somebody else to do. That's for the church to do. Maybe a priest to do, or a youth minister." I'm, hey, you do you, whatever's good for you is good for you. So I just wanted first impressions of that, and then maybe dive in a little bit to help our listeners to say, how do you actually do this and let it be successful? Because, it's laid out. Jesus says a few very interesting things in here that I'm I don't know. I've never had it go well where I'm hey, I'm going to bring 2 or 3 people with me and hey, we're going to tell you the facts. Yeah. So I don't know. Just toss that out. A few initial thoughts on this topic.
Yeah. So initial thoughts, and I preached about this on Sunday because it was our gospel from Sunday. If you look at the passage,
which you can listen to on
on YouTube,
on YouTube and and
the other places
that we have things
where we post things.
Yeah, great.
Facebook. If I preached on the fact that context is important for understanding things.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look right before this passage, the context, the immediate context is the desire of the Father to seek out the one who goes astray, leaving the 99. It's the parable of the 99 sheep, or the 100 sheep, and the good shepherd leaves the 99, and that's a weird thing to do anyway.
Right.
It's meant to be shocking. And goes after the one who's straying, and then says, "It is not the will of my Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish." So you have the desire of the Father, right? The will of the Father, which is to seek out those who are straying.
Right.
That's the immediate context. And then here in the gospel we're actually looking at, we're shown how we participate in that will of the Father and that desire of the Father.
Right.
And you can even see that in the words of the gospel itself. If he listens to you, you have won over your brother. You have gained your brother.
Mm-hmm.
The whole point of this is not necessarily to ensure, this is why the context is important.
Right.
It's not necessarily just about like, how do we have a good community life, but it's how do we participate in the desire of God to save those who are straying.
Yeah.
Even perhaps at the expense of them reacting badly. So those are first impressions. There's a lot that needs to be fleshed out there.
So just to clarify, you're saying though biblically we would read this as Jesus was like this was all one conversation, being like.
Well, I think it's yes, kind of. So Matthew 18, it's more like the structure of the gospel itself. Matthew 18 begins a new section in the Gospel of Matthew, and the Gospel of Matthew is ordered according to like 5 major speeches or discourses of Jesus. And it doesn't mean that he said everything in each of those all at once.
Right.
But the material is all put together such that you can tell it's one teaching.
Right.
And so if you want to figure out what those discourses are about, you kind of look at the beginning and see what the themes are.
Right.
And then he normally goes into parables to like develop the imagery around the themes further.
And because we're stupid. Right?
Well, parables can be hard to understand.
There are definitely some very tough parables to understand, but I often think about it like when we're in a conversation and I'll share something and be like, you know what I'm saying? And they're like, not so much. And then it's like, oh, well, let me use this example.
Yeah,
let me use this example.
Like
right. Jesus is just like, let me give you one more. Okay.
Yeah.
So now,
go
ahead.
That's the first impression of it, right?
Right.
But that doesn't really get to the question of like, how exactly do we do this?
Now, but are you saying...
It's more why.
Right. But are you saying in some sense, like, okay, so maybe the one has drifted away, right?
Yeah.
You go after the one. Mm-hmm. So you've found the one.
Yes.
You went to the place and found him.
That's right.
Now it's like, you might have to address him and be like, hey, I want to talk to you about something, right?
Right.
I don't know. Just putting it on the table. I've had many years of this in youth ministry. Prior to youth ministry, I feel like unless both people are in a place of faith and understanding, it really hasn't gone that great for me. Even in the most loving way, to be like, hey, I'm worried about you, right? Mm-hmm. I want to talk to you about something. Just our defense mechanisms are so high.
Oh, yeah. Hair trigger.
So how do we even do this? Because I know the average listener is probably saying, yeah, not my place. I don't need to do it.
Right.
So I guess kind of like, give me your thoughts on that. First, like, is it the average person's place to do that? And then second is like, I don't know, what are some practicals when you're going into it? Maybe it's in spiritual direction or addressing somebody, or even in your past life prior to priesthood, like, was there ways? So I don't know, maybe address that first part of like, is the average person like called to address big issues with people?
Yeah, no, absolutely they are. I mean, Jesus is very clear here. He's not like, first there's a little text critical thing, which is just interesting.
Go for it.
It says in our gospel, if your brother sins against you, which makes it sound like it's a between you and me kind of thing.
Right.
Not just,
like you stole my fantasy football pick.
Exactly.
I'm mad,
yeah. Now we need to talk.
Right.
And not just like if they're doing something wrong in general, but when you look at the Greek manuscripts, actually the much better testimony is if your brother sins without the against you. The against you is kind of dubious. It's not sure whether that was added or whether it was dropped in the manuscript tradition, which I think is just helpful for us to hear because we are looking for any excuse to get out of this, right? Any excuse, because it doesn't go well often.
9 times out of 10 in my experience, if not 10 out of 10.
But I am saying to you, Jesus is saying to you, and also Pope Benedict is saying to you.
B16.
Yeah, so the popes put out a Lenten message every year. It's normally kind of a nice reflection,
Right.
And in 2012, he put out this reflection on fraternal correction on this issue. And he cites this passage among others, but it's not the only one by far.
Right.
Like he starts with a passage from Hebrews and all this. And he says, among many other beautiful things in that pretty short message, if you search for Pope Benedict the 16th, 2012 Lenten message, you'll find it. Okay. And it's not long. It's not complicated to understand. But
maybe we can link it on our YouTube page.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, maybe if Joey does that. All right, sure, great.
Sure, okay.
Put it in my notes, Joey, link to YouTube page.
So he talks about the verb used to express fraternal correction in this passage. It's the same to indicate the prophetic mission of Christians to speak out against a generation indulging in evil. And he cites Ephesians 5:11. So there's something prophetic. And when you look at the lives of the prophets, like things didn't always go well for them. People didn't react well, but that doesn't mean that, they were like, well, nobody's going to listen to me anyway. Like when God puts this on your heart, this prophetic call to admonish for the sake of bringing back, right? To win, to gain over, you have to carry it out. The church actually includes this as a spiritual work of mercy. In our list of spiritual works of mercy, we have the corporal ones like feeding the poor and the spiritual ones. And this specific thing, it's called admonishing the sinner.
Right.
It's a spiritual work of mercy. And he says it's important to recover, meaning that we tend to lose it, this dimension of Christian charity. We must not remain silent before evil. I am thinking of all those Christians who, out of human regard or purely personal convenience, adapt to the prevailing mentality rather than warning their brothers and sisters against ways of thinking and acting that are contrary to the truth and that do not follow the path of goodness. Christian admonishment, for its part, is never motivated by a spirit of accusation or recrimination. It is always moved by love and mercy and springs from genuine concern for the good of the other. In a world pervaded by individualism,
but isn't that... Oh, go ahead.
it is essential... Dramatic pause.
Dramatic pause. Let me
It is
insert
essential
something.
to rediscover the importance of fraternal correction so that together we may journey toward holiness. So he's saying, like, look, I get it. It's hard. You could say, maybe it was easier in the time of Jesus and he's not talking to our time.
Right. It's always been
kind of weak. But Pope Benedict here in 2012 is saying, like, no, we have to recover this because this is an essential part of Christian charity.
Mm-hmm.
Concern for the good of the other. Now, that didn't get into the details of how to go about doing this.
Right, right. But isn't it so subjective in the sense of like what I think is like important to bring up and what the person receiving it is like, this isn't really a big deal. You know what I mean? Like it just brings up the question of, what is big enough to bring up? Right. I saw somebody spill something and it's like, hey, you didn't really fully wipe that up. I need to go to my brother and, call them out. Like, that's a ridiculous example, but you know what I mean? No. Like there's different varying lines of like, are we talking about just like severe things? Are we talking about average things? Like, I mean,
we're talking about sinful things, right?
Which is a good distinction.
Yeah. Like just we're not talking about mistakes. Right? You're not, chiding. This isn't like sort of basketball training.
Right.
Where like, you want to make this young person who has talent into a superstar one day. And so you're going to be so hard on them, right? You missed one free throw out of 50, so run like 50 laps to make up for it. Like, it's not that.
Right.
That may have its place.
Right.
But this is not that.
Right.
This is a genuine concern for the good of the other, motivated by charity, which is love, right?
Yeah.
This unselfish love that God has for us,
right?
Which gives us the strength to ignore even human regard, so like how they react, for the sake of their good. So it's talking about like when to do this. It's when you see someone sinning. Now,
good distinction.
Yeah. So there's more to it as well, right? Like there is a truth that our ability to communicate to somebody and actually be heard is dependent on our level of intimacy with them. If I don't know anybody at all, they're not likely to listen.
Right.
There may be some instances where the prophetic call, right?
I was going to say your vocation lends to somebody listening to you more than the average person.
It does. It generates that
right.
sort of relationship.
Right.
But okay. Like let me just get into one example. We can go into more examples later, but before I was in seminary, when I was in college, I remember I was starting to take my faith seriously, and it was starting to bother me how often we spoke badly about other people. There's different species of gossip, right? You can say something false about somebody, and that's called calumny. But you can also say something true that people don't need to know that damages their reputation.
Right.
And that's also gossip. It's called detraction. You're detracting from their reputation. So I was in a group of friends, and they were all very good friends. We were all like really trying in our Christian faith. It wasn't and they started sort of teasing someone behind this person's back and just like gossiping. It wasn't a really serious thing.
Right.
And it just, for some reason in that moment, I was like, and I think that a lot of people have had this, like, I shouldn't be part of this conversation.
Right.
And I said something very simple, like, we shouldn't talk about him like that. And it was kind of a like it
Mic
brought
drop.
Brought the conversation to a halt. It was awkward.
Wait, was it like this?
A little bit. It was more like sort of a car screeching to a halt.
I don't have that drop. We'll
emergency brake pull. But like it was a little dramatic and a little awkward, and I certainly felt awkward.
Right.
But then I wasn't, sad that I'd said it. And the conversation kind of moved on to something else, and it was all fine. Afterwards, 2 of the people of the 4 came up to me and said, I am so glad that you said that. I was thinking the same thing. I didn't have the courage to speak up. And like that just meant so much. That was such a good witness.
Right.
See, the thing is, we tend to know when things are wrong.
Right.
Like when things are sinful. That's what our conscience does.
Right.
That's what the Holy Spirit acting in our conscience, prompting us towards virtue and away from sin.
Yeah.
That's what he does. And so in that situation, I would guarantee you every single one of those people knew that we shouldn't be talking about this person like that.
Right.
But out of sort of this weird like peer pressure where it's like none of us want to do this, but since we don't want to offend the others.
Right.
Nobody said anything. And I'm not saying that like I'm great at this. That's like one of, I could probably count on one hand.
Right.
The number of times in my life I've done something like that.
Right.
Which is not a number I'm particularly proud of.
Right.
But I'm just saying like
look how awesome I am. One hand.
Like that I did that. I think that's a very common experience. And what the gospel and what Pope Benedict are telling us is that we should be able to do that. We should cultivate a habit of detachment from how others think of us,
right?
Such that we could do that because we know it's right, even if nobody reacts well.
Right.
That there is a value to witnessing to the truth, even when everybody rejects that witness. That's the prophetic dimension of this.
Right.
People happen to react well in that case.
And
that felt very good and
it brought up, like, I heard 2 points that I want to, like, our listeners to get across. I think one was having a relationship with those people.
Yeah.
Like, brought validity to what you said.
Yes.
Like, you weren't going up in a random group of guys and being like, hey, what's up? But if you were in a random group, it also brought up a second point that I want to say to people, like, if you're at work, if you're at different things, it doesn't have to be this long lecture.
No.
You said, hey,
very simple thing.
I don't think we should be talking about that guy. Simple. Boom. Like, those are two practicals that, like, I want our listeners to kind of put in their pocket and say. One is like, hey, you see somebody, like, around you at work and school, whatever stage of life our listeners are in, build the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
It will come across just infinity times better.
Yes.
Because I remember an instance in college where I had to talk to somebody. I was in charge of a group of guys, and I had to talk to somebody about just kind of like underage drinking and some different stuff. And I thought it went well. I was like, I care about you. Like, I see more for you than this. Like, goes well, and then, like, leaves, and then, like, 2 days later, it's like, oh yeah, this person hates you. They're so mad at you. And it's like, well, I did say what I had to say, and I felt like like God was calling me to say. But a lot of times, I look back and think I could have established that relationship a little bit better.
Right.
And I want to bring a distinction in. We're not talking about you're walking down a hallway in school, or you're somewhere in the world and there's a egregious case of, like, bullying or something like that, that it's like immediate action needs to be taken. If you're around somebody, though, like, it doesn't hurt to make the extra effort to build the relationship so that they can receive that feedback well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. That's very important. But it's also very easy to rationalize away our responsibility by saying the relationship isn't built enough.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. How long do I have to have known them? How much? Yeah.
So here's the thing, and this is why, like, I brought up the 99 at the beginning and the God's desire that we participate in to seek out and save those who are straying.
Right.
Like the crux of this thing, which is another word for cross, is that for the sake of their good, we have to be willing to endure a bad response.
Right.
That they might not like us, that it might destroy even that relationship. If we really believe that this is for their good,
right,
then that's the act of love, is to be willing to sacrifice our relationship for the sake of witnessing. Like, there's so many examples of, for instance, teenagers who were going astray, and everybody, like, wants to be their friend and just sort of encourages them along and this kind of thing. And then you have one person who's, like, says, what you're doing is harmful. It's hurting yourself.
Right.
Like, I want to see you fully alive. And has this prophetic witness. And maybe it takes years. Maybe it takes decades, but people remember stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like, that's just how we're built.
Right.
And so we have to trust that, like, we play our part in this and God does his part.
Right.
And we might not ever see the fruits of fraternal correction. It might look like a complete failure to us, but we don't know what that example is going to do for somebody down the line, especially if they've continued to reject that.
Right.
And then they hit rock bottom.
Right. Now, I want to bring in a last point before we go into our segment, because we haven't done it in a while, so I want to do watching, reading, thinking. But so at what point for you is it that if those people, though, around you do not stop that, like, at what point, though, is either, let's say you are friends.
Yeah.
At what point then do you have to go the step further and say, hey, I brought this up to you. I'm really worried about this. Like, this is harming you. Like, at what point do you cut off that friendship?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, because I feel like a lot of people are going to say, well, that's easy with a coworker. Okay, I'll just see them at work.
Mm-hmm.
But what about one of the hardest people to do it with? Family members.
Yeah.
Like, you bring up to a family member, like, you're doing this. It's not bringing life to you or anybody around you. I'm worried about it. Like, you can't totally escape them, but you know the relationship is damaged, you know? And so is there a point where you were around those guys striving for Christian thing? And even though they were like, yeah, this is great. What if they keep on doing it? Like in that example, let's just use that. I mean, would there have been a point where you're like, hey, I'm going to step away from this group of friends? Or is it just is it more measuring the level of severity of the thing they're doing?
Really, like, that's a prudential call, right? So the virtue of prudence, right, very much depends on circumstance and individual things, personality, like all of it. You have to take all those things in when you're trying to make a prudent decision. And so I can't really say, like, in this case do this, in this case do this.
Exactly.
Which I know is frustrating to hear, but it's just how it is.
Yeah. So that's the end of the podcast.
But, yeah. But like, I think the principle of charity is just so important here, right? Charity is the love of God that dwells in us. It's a theological virtue.
Right.
It's something given to us in our baptism.
Right.
Faith, hope, and charity. And when, just tangent a little bit, but when we sin mortally, we lose charity.
Right.
When we repent and go to confession, we gain back that virtue of divine charity that dwells within us, and we can develop it as a habit, right? We can get the habit of acting out of that charity, or we can kind of suppress it. But we have to be confident that we have that gift of God's own love dwelling in us, inspiring us to do the charitable thing. Yeah. The thing that is concerned about the good of the other. And so, like, I mean, I can imagine any number of responses, even just for that specific occasion. And it's not always clear which one is the right one or which one is the best one. Right. But that's not always the best way to frame the question anyway. Like, like what is the charitable response? Right. What is the generous response here? What do I know is in the best interest of the other, even if it turns out badly for me? Right. Hopefully it won't. I want to stay friends with these people. Right. Right. I don't want them to not like me. Everybody wants to be liked. Right. But yeah, I can see leaving a group of friends if the gossip reaches a level of toxicity, right? Where you just can't get away from it. And then it's like, yeah, you're leaving in sort of a prophetic witness of, like, you know, I can't be around you all because you talk this way, but also for the sake of your own spiritual life. Right.
Salvation of your own soul.
Yeah. Like, that's, I don't know, that's in that specific occasion, that's a real possibility. Yeah.
Which go ahead.
Yeah. I don't know where I was going after that.
Well, I was just going to say, which brings up the importance to say, pray.
Yes.
Before, I mean, yes. You brought up an instance where it wasn't like you're able in that moment to be like, let me go back, reflect, pray. In the moment, you're called to that action. But the prayer is what leads you to that moment, like to make this tough choice in the moment. Yeah. You know, like, people are always like, well, I can't be a saint. I can't be da-da-da. I'm like, yes, you can, because it's in preparation of your prayer, your spiritual life. Everything you're doing now leads to those moments. Yes. Where it's like, that's exactly. And now I have the courage to do it. Boom. Mm-hmm. So, hey, let's go into our final segment, reading, watching, thinking. We haven't done this in a while. So what are you reading, watching, and thinking?
Okay. I'm reading a book right now called The Case for Jesus by Brant Petrie. It's very good. It's about the historical veracity of the gospel, the historical truth.
I love how he's like, he says a word and he's like, let me explain it to Joey's eyes and just everybody else.
Glaze over.
That's just from having like 2 young children and a pregnant wife. That's constant of like, is life happening? Go ahead. Yeah.
Like, it's so I've studied a lot of this stuff on kind of a high level, at the Biblicum, right? That was my degree, was getting into historical criticism. This is written on a very popular level, but it's written with a lot of really good scholarship behind it. So I like Dr. Brant Petrie quite a bit. I've never met him, but I know people who know him, and I know people who have studied under him when he taught at Notre Dame Seminary in Louisiana, and I listened to his stuff, and I think he's really solid.
Yeah. He's also the founder of the Petri dish that they use for science.
That is true.
False. No one looked that up.
Anachronistic, very confused chronology. But he wrote this book, and it's a distillation of his thesis, somewhat, a summary of his thesis. It's very easy to read, and it's very good. It's just if you ever hear historical critical things about like the authorship of the Gospels or dating of the Gospels, like this is a very refreshing thing to read.
Right.
He doesn't shy away from it, but he's just very, very honest and sort of simple in the investigation. So it's a good book. Also not terribly long. What are you reading?
A little cop out here, but our church, St. Anne's, has recently kind of published a course called Foundations, and I'm going through it with a group of guys.
Oh,
and I initially was part of a group that kind of was doing it and proofreading, going through it, and but like this is a time for me to actually like dive in even more to like read the reflections. So for those who don't know, it's part of our discipleship pathway, and it's a course that goes through nine tenets of like the Catholic faith and just Christianity. And so reading that, going through that, it's been really good, especially since there's time to reflect and journal and that. I definitely sound like a suck up, but I'm not, because I'm not that type of person. It's just, that's what I'm doing right now. So I am mostly watching sports. Yeah. I'm interested to watch the Fatima movie.
Yeah, I've heard good things.
I'm kind of like, should I not? But, yeah. So Dallas Stars, been watching them a lot. Been watching,
that's been exciting.
NBA basketball and all of that, and excited to watch this coming Thursday. Football back. Okay, you.
I watched a little bit of The Office the other day. It had been a long time. But I was with a buddy of mine, and we just like, I want to watch some of The Office. So we watched like 2 episodes, and it was just so delightful.
Nice. Were they like one of the iconic funny ones, or just random
like all
episodes?
Of them?
Yeah,
they were random episodes.
Right.
But yeah,
there's some though that like there's those viral threads on like Facebook or different things that are like certain scenes that like Dwight with the CPR, doing CPR on the dummy on the floor where they're learning CPR.
I don't remember that one.
Oh my gosh, go back and watch it. If anybody else is with me, come on, just tell me.
So that was really nice. And what am I thinking? I'm going to go on retreat in a couple weeks, and I'm very much looking forward to that. This will be my first retreat this year. So just a FYI, like priests are bound canonically to make a retreat every year, because the church recognizes the primacy of the spiritual life for the sake of being able to do the apostolic and missionary and pastoral work. I think that's important to remember whenever we're struggling in our own lives with, I've got so much work to do, I can't possibly set aside time for prayer each day. That prayer is the heart and the source of our strength for doing all this other work. And so that's why I have to go make this retreat, and I'm very much looking forward to it.
So hot take, should Catholic churches require lay church workers to do the same thing?
I kind of think so. Yeah.
You heard it here.
I think it would be a paradigm shift. I have no power to.
Father Paul has made a declaration for the Diocese of Dallas. Everybody heard it here.
Speaking officially, on behalf of the Universal Church. No, but I really do. I can't just go and say that and then be like, well, it's just for priests. Maybe it looks different a little bit, but I do think it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And what am I thinking? Dude, my wife's about to have a baby.
Yeah. Congrats.
Thanks. It's coming soon. So she's due.
Baby name, still a question mark?
I think it's set. Sophia.
Sophia, yes.
So.
Victory. I claim responsibility. This was my favorite name.
You can't claim
from the
any
beginning.
Responsibility for any of that. So.
Wisdom, be attentive. Sophia means wisdom.
Thank you. So, Sophia.
Lady Wisdom. Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you. My wife will be happy to know that you. No, I'm just kidding. I'm happy with
approve.
It. Yeah, that you approve. So, thanks to everybody who listened to us today. So excited that you took the time to listen to this podcast. Make sure to check us out on YouTube or Apple, Spotify, all those areas. Submit any questions at our Gmail, prodigalandthepriest.com. or St. Anne Parish /PTP on behalf of Joey Scansella, Father Paul. Take care.
God bless.